as we wait for the release of Yone and especially his version in the event, so we can cover all the Spirit Blossom stories. We finally have a chance to get back onto the rest of the lore. And since I'd like to stay around Ionia to complement the ongoing event, we should have a look at the latest story about Rakan and Xayah. However, before we dive into this one, we quickly need to recap their bios, because both Xayah and Rakan got some minor tweaks in their stories. So without further ado, let's quickly have a look at those bios. Xayah comes from the Lothland tribe of the island of Quinlan. Long time ago, that place was full of magic, which gave the Lothland tribe immense power. But over time, as more and more humans traveled to Ionia, the local Vastaya started negotiating with them, accepting them into their community, and even breeding with them, which resulted in the tribes distancing themselves from the primordial magical essence of the First Lands, which is a fancy old word for Ionia. But later, as humans started building their cities and castles in Ionia, some Vastaya got annoyed, and they started fighting back. Of course, Xayah is one of them, and she wasn't alone. There was enough annoyed Vastaya to kickstart a rebellion that started wiping out entire human strongholds. Meanwhile, Rakan was born during the decline of the Lothland tribe. Like everyone else, he watched humans slowly pollute their magical lands. But instead of fighting them directly, as a battle dancer, he believed the better way would be to show people how beautiful their magic was, with the help of either songs or dances. Perhaps then humans would realize how great Ionia used to be. And so Rakan started performing wherever he could. But no matter how many dances and songs he performed, he started feeling useless, because he realized he was just an entertainment to all the drunk humans. But this all changed when he performed in Volonko, where Xayah was looking for a lost artifact. When the two met the first time, Xayah saw Rakan as nothing but a buffoon, especially after Rakan tried to charm her a couple of times. But when Xayah explained what she and her group was doing, she was surprised to see how much Rakan agreed with her, and how much he was mad at the humans too. In fact, to Rakan, joining Xayah's rebellion would finally give him purpose. And so Xayah accepted him to the rebellion. Rakan became the perfect distraction for her stealth skills, and soon the two even developed feelings for each other. Years later, after the Noxian invasion, Ionians formed groups that were far more aggressive and dangerous, such as the Navori Brotherhood or the hated Order of Shadow. But because of these groups, more and more Vastaya are starting to hate humans, which only helps Xayah and Rakan recruit more forces. This was just a super TLDR version of their newly updated bios. The only thing that's really new are their motivations for hating humans. Xayah hates humans because her father used to sing to her about the glory days of the great Vastayan heroes, while these days all the Vastaya do is form alliances with the humans, wait for the alliances to get broken, and then let humans have more territory. And Rakan hates humans just as much, but instead of stabbing them in the heart, he's willing to give them a chance and show them what they are missing out on. But now, with their past recapped, let's dive into their newest story, which I will also shorten because it is quite long, called A Piece of Shadow Cake. The story begins with Xayah dodging bullets that came at her from a nearby temple. Xayah knew humans called their weapons Kashuri rifles, which is a name you may recognize from Jin's story, because it was the Kashuri armory that gave Jin his gun. Thankfully, Xayah was too fast to get hit, and while she ran around, her tribesmen already climbed the ancient temple and reached what it guarded, a quinlan. It was a circle of 5 massive rocks, orbiting around each other, floating in the sky. It served as a great ward, which contained ancient enchantments, which held back and limited the natural magic of their land. From the Quinlan's greystone hung a dozen ropes, attached to spikes which the Vastayan tribe had hammered into it. Hanging from some of those lines, with ropes tied to their waists, were the bodies of the slain, and on the ground far below were more dead bodies. A dozen Vastaya had died trying to reach the stone, killed by humans' cruel gunfire. The tribesmen that joined Xayah on this mission were the Kepsala Vastaya. Their bodies were feathered, like Xayah's own tribe, but their heads were long, and from their crown grew great horns. With their help, and with Rakan's superior acrobatics, Rakan was able to jump from tree to tree, until he gained enough speed to jump over the temple's walls, and straight onto the quinlan. After that, Xayah ordered others to retreat. But even though the fleeing Vastaya were easy prey for the marksmen, the humans didn't take the bait, because they knew Rakan was the only target that mattered to them. Up on the Quinlan, as bullets exploded around him, Rakan set down a package, but he forgot what he was supposed to do next. Xayah shouted at him that he had matches behind his ear, but he couldn't hear her over the gunfire. Thankfully, when Xayah peeked out of the trees and mimed reaching behind her ear, Rakan saw her, and he seemed to remember the rest of the plan. And so he lit the match, set it against the package, and jumped off. Moments later, as he and the Kepthala gathered around Xayah in the woods, they witnessed the largest rock of the Quinlan blowing up, making the other floating stones crash into the ground. With the giant Quinlan gone, the countless centuries-old magic it held back was suddenly released back into the land. And soon the forest around them shone with light and wonder, just as it did in the old days. Not only that, thanks to the magic, all the Vastaya had their abilities empowered, and they felt a rush of emotions they had never felt before, as they all cheered, laughed, and roared in joy. Before Xayah left, she told the Kepthala to use this magic to protect the land. Then she walked towards Rakan, who was standing alone at the edge of the forest. Unlike everyone else, Rakan was a little bit sad, because even though they destroyed the Quinlan and released its magic, in doing so, they also destroyed an entire human town. As the Ionian magic terraformed the land, Xayah and Rakan watched massive roots smashing dozens of houses. The other houses, made out of wood, became alive, and they crushed everything inside them as they collapsed onto themselves to turn into trees. There was a woman clutching a child, who ran from her home to a horse cart. Behind her, a man barely escaped being squashed by a huge vine that fell onto their house. He was carrying whatever he could save. He threw it all into the cart, but as soon as the wave of magic reached them, the cart too burst to life, reforming itself as plants from which the vehicle was built. Xayah watched as it then turned itself into a giant insect-like creature made of wood and vines. The man slashed at it with his walking stick, but then, together with the woman and the child, they all fled. Meanwhile, on the other side of the town, an old man struggled to keep his footing on the ever-changing earth. He scrambled for a few paces, before a pair of glowing forest spirits, shaped like ghost butterflies, grabbed him and lifted him up. Then, as they flew over the trees, they dropped him, and he landed with a thud. After that, the man's soul seemed to fight against its physical body, seeking to escape its own shell and join the forest. Other humans ran past this man, and Xayah could see all of their souls trying to rip out of their bodies too. An old woman grabbed the lying old man, lifted him to his feet, and together, limping, they fled. Finally, Xayah said that the humans' greed brought this to them, but Rakan said nothing in reply. In the next part of the story, Rakan and Xayah traveled to the Vlotah village. The Vlotah had always been a small tribe, even in the ancient times. They were small and nimble, but they had massive shoulders that protruded up their backs like wings of bone. Their fur glittered with green and purple. As they entered the village, Rakan pointed out that the local magic was unclean, and he wanted to leave because it was upsetting his cloak. But Xayah decided to stay, because a victory here would show everyone in Zayun that a rebellion was possible. Besides, it was the Vlotah tribe who asked them for help. At the center of the humble place, they were greeted by Levika, the Vlotah elder. He explained that they have heard how Xayah and Rakan saved Consul Akunir and Speaker Kol at Puobi, and they were hoping they could help them too. Of course, you may remember both Kol and Akunir from the other story that Rakan and Xayah have, which we have previously covered on this channel too. Both of them helped Xayah and Rakan free prisoners from a prison of the Shadow Order. But after they lost a member of their group during this mission, they decided to split and let all the unaware Vastaya know what humans have been doing to them. Anyway, after Rakan introduced both of them to the Elder, they learned that north of the tribe, there was the Koln Temple, which protected a small crystal quinlan that hardly affected the local magic. For many generations, the Vlotah have lived peacefully besides the humans who tended this quinlan. But now, a group calling themselves Yanlei have taken over, and they dwindled and darkened the magic. Of course, in the Zed comic, we learned that the Yanlei was a local name for Zed's Shadow Order. The Elder revealed that the Vlotah tried to retake the temple with the help of the good monks of Khol, but they were driven back, so they were hoping Xayah and Rakan would help them here. But surprisingly, Xayah wasn't too happy to help, because they were helping humans retake a quinlan, and so if they were to help them, they would do so by destroying the quinlan, not surrendering it to some monks. The Elder replied that would destroy the Voli town, and many people would die. Xayah corrected him that humans would die, and should humans try to take their lands back, the released magic would help the Vlotah defend themselves. At that point, the Elder was mad at Xayah, because she kept interrupting him, but Rakan calmed him down by jumping up next to him and telling him that he might have to slap him, of course, by which he meant no disrespect. He then said that he is simply protecting his lady, who speaks wisdom, and Rakan told everyone to listen, because she speaks the only truth. Of course, Rakan wasn't paying attention, and so he had no idea what he was talking about. In response, calmly, the Elder explained that the monks of Khol have never broken their promises, and they have even protected them. When Rakan returned back to Xayah's side, she asked him what he thinks of this entire situation, but he told her that he wasn't paying attention. He then kissed Xayah on her cheek, and told her that they were both yelling, they were both angry, but the Elder was just afraid. Xayah smiled because she knew Rakan was right. The Elder was just worried. And so Xayah bowed and apologized to the Elder for disrespecting him. However, she did not back away from what she said. As long as they would rely on humans to keep their promises, they would never be free. Their numbers were already dwindling, but with the magic free, that could all change. After her speech, the Elder stared at her for a moment, before telling her that they would consider her words, and they would have an answer for her in the morning. Rakan was surprised by this, because he didn't expect to stay overnight, especially in a place that did not have chocolate. The next morning, Elder Levica made his decision. He swore to protect any lands reclaimed by the wild magic released, and he assigned the few warriors he had to Xayah's command. But because Xayah knew the Vlotah tribe would need its warriors later, she decided to use them only as a diversion. So while Xayah and Rakan would retake the temple alone, the Vlotah would attack the Yanlei patrols, hopefully to take some of their numbers away from the temple. And so, after a day of traveling, they arrived at the giant village surrounding the temple. In fact, they realized this was the largest town they had encountered in years. It was a small city covering the entire valley. They couldn't go around it, unless they wanted to climb the bare cliffs surrounding the city, so their only option was to blend in with the humans and go through. Of course, Xayah didn't really like the fact that she would be wearing human clothes, but that was nothing compared to how much Rakan freaked out when he noticed the cape he was going to wear was grey. To him, grey wasn't even a color. The story then fast forwards a couple of hours. As the night fell, the guards were closing the gates after they let the last visitors into the city, with Rakan and Xayah among them. As they entered through the gate, they could feel the ill magic used to construct the walls. It felt alien, even for mortal magic. It was dark and angry. The enormous thorn vines that made the walls hadn't been asked to cooperate. They were forced by the magic to hold the stony walls together. So naturally, Xayah wondered what would happen once these vines were free. Then, suddenly, both Rakan and Xayah started to feel magic nearby, but they couldn't see it, until they looked up. Above them, in a tower, a man wearing red robes stood. From his eyes flowed a strange darkness, and he held a small bell which misted dark vapor. With certainty, Rakan realized this man was looking for Vastaya and Yordles, but it was already too late. The two ran into an alleyway as the mage screeched a horrific sound. He had seen through their disguises, and horns of alarm answered the mage's cry. The city was like a labyrinth, but even as Rakan and Xayah darted from alleyway to alleyway, the ever-seeing dark mist of the mage's bell poured right after them. The bell released a sound no mortal would ever hear or feel the pain of, but it cracked like a giant's whip in the ears of the Vastaya. For a moment, as the sound vibrated their feathers, they thought they were discovered. But then, as the bell's sound wandered a different direction, away from them, it sounded like the mage was uncertain where they even were now. Ahead of them, there were guards pulling random people from the crowd and inspecting them. When someone resisted, the leader of the guards led his shadow tattoos to come alive and give him extra limbs that would slash their enemies. Trying to avoid fighting shadow magic, Rakan and Xayah dashed into a different alleyway that was free of guards. Then they sprinted forward, only to find out that the alleyway curved right into the main street. What's worse, they noticed a group of the Yanlei warriors closing in on them from behind. For just a moment, Rakan stopped and inspected all the houses around them. Finally, when he noticed a house that was nearly ruined, but which had recently swept entranceway and clean windows, he dragged Xayah towards it. There, they were greeted by the voice of an old woman, who asked them what's happening. Before Xayah could say anything, however, Rakan quickly told the old woman that the guards were looking for them, and that they needed help. First, the old woman looked at the guards, and she saw that they were marching towards them, after they noticed Rakan and Xayah's suspicious behavior. So then the old woman told them to run behind the corner and enter the house from the side entrance. At first, it seemed like there was no side entrance. It was just a dead end, and Xayah got mad at Rakan that he trusted a random old woman. But then, the wall suddenly moved, and it revealed a hidden door. Once the pair was inside, the old woman slid the smuggler's entrance closed, hiding it ever existed. Perhaps sensing danger, the woman backed away toward a full moon spear resting against the wall. It was a fine weapon that contained ancient magics. Then the woman asked them if they were Vlotah. Once again, before Xayah could stop him, Rakan nodded, and he introduced himself as the battle dancer Rakan of the Lothland tribe. To Xayah's surprise, the woman laughed, telling them that Elder Levica told her he was seeking the help of the Lothland, but she hadn't heard from the Vlotah tribe since. Then the woman introduced herself as Abes Gothan, which was immediately followed by loud banging on the front door. So Gothan told Rakan and Xayah to stay quiet while she gets rid of whoever is outside. But as she rushed to the front door to check who it was, 6 young human acolytes appeared from the other rooms in the house. They were all bandaged and appeared wounded, and Xayah could sense they were gathering whatever little magic they could muster. So just in case, she prepared a couple of hidden magical daggers of her own. When Abes Gothan reappeared, the woman held a finger to her lips to indicate they should stay quiet. It seemed like the best option was to pretend nobody was here. And so Gothan quietly led the more injured monks back into their rooms, while the rest started humming a haunting melody as they began to prepare food. A while later, when the food was ready, Gothan and her 2 assistants sat down at the table with Rakan and Xayah. Then Gothan explained who they really were. It turned out, they were the monks who guarded the temple before the Shadow Order came. At first, Gothan explained that the Khol monks were able to hide in the city only because the Navori Brotherhood helped them. But before Gothan was able to finish her sentence, Rakan interrupted her, asking about the main guard with the shadow tattoos. So Gothan explained that the ones with the tattoos were the Order of Shadow. They used to be part of the Navori Brotherhood. But before she was able to say why they left, Rakan interrupted her again, asking her if her tribe is at war with theirs. Patiently, Gothan replied, not exactly. They took their temple, but they still let most of the monks live. As long as they were able to harvest their shadow magic, there was some form of peace here. As Rakan bit into his bread, he asked if the monks were singing the song called Theln and the Falling Leaves while cooking this. Gothan replied yes, and she asked back if it is true that to the Vlotah, the songs are important while they cook. Rakan explained that for a stone flour bread, they would traditionally sing a happy song that you can drum with. After all, the Vlotah could taste the difference after it was baked that way. Then the 3 talked about their mission here. Gothan told them that she could help them by leading them to the temple. Apparently, she also sent a word to the Kinko Order for help. And she revealed that there was about 100 Shadow Order warriors in the city, and about 50 in the temple. But Xayah told her she was confident in dealing with those numbers without anyone's help. In fact, even after Gothan offered her help many times, Xayah told her there is no time to wait, and they wouldn't need anyone's help. Then she asked Gothan to leave, because she wanted to have a moment alone with Rakan. Once Gothan left, Xayah whispered to Rakan that they should leave right after everyone falls asleep. Rakan suggested that they should at least let them know what will happen when they destroy the Quinlan, but Xayah told him that they would be betrayed if they knew. Rakan tried to convince her that he likes this Abes more than Elder Levica. At least she wasn't afraid, but Xayah remained unconvinced. Although she did admit that 50 warriors was a lot. Then when she asked Rakan why did he trust this monk, he replied it simply came to his intuition. Xayah didn't sleep a lot that night. She spent most of her time studying the maps and figuring out where the Shadow Order patrols would be. And right as the moon rose, together with Rakan, they sneaked out of the house unnoticed. It was calm outside, and so they had easy time getting through the city and past the nearby farmhouses that led to the main mountain. There they felt the magical environment change, and it was obvious the quinlan was somewhere around there. But unlike the other quinlans, this one didn't dampen the power of the spirit magic to create change. It straight up absorbed it all, leeching it from the landscape and the spirit realm. As Rakan and Xayah got closer to the mountain, first they met only regular patrols, but soon they saw bigger and bigger groups that marched downhill with an obvious urgency. Xayah realized this was probably caused by the Vlotah diversions, just as was planned. But instead of attacking these humans from behind, Xayah decided to save their energy to finish their mission stealthily first. Although, she did realize that the Vlotah were weak without their magic, and so they had to finish the mission quickly. They finally reached the temple by late afternoon. It took them a while because they had to hide before every patrol they saw. At the temple, they had no other way than to force themselves in. And so, as Rakan took down the first guard with a feather knife right into his chest, the alarm sounded again, and the two started working quickly. As more Shadow Warriors rushed in, Rakan knocked them all up, and Xayah finished them off with more daggers. When their surroundings seemed clear for the moment, Rakan took a theatrical bow, and he stayed outside to keep the other warriors busy, as Xayah entered the temple alone. Inside, Xayah found strange crystal cubes that somehow, against everything that was possible, did not have a soul. It was as if their maker managed to craft them without leaving any of his essence, or the essence of the materials, pass into them. Physically, the crystal cubes existed, but on a magical level, they didn't. The story doesn't really explain what these things are, so remember these because this will likely be referenced in the future. Also, it might be copies of the magical shadow box. Anyway, to Xayah these things were creepy, and so she walked past them right into the main hall. There she found the center of the temple, which was bathed in red light, which came from the quinlan hovering above. Like many quinlans, it looked like floating rotating rocks, but Xayah watched in horror as this one pulled tiny forest spirits into it. Then there was a shift in the air, and Xayah ducked because she knew she wasn't alone anymore. Soon after that, an armored warrior entered the room from the shadows. Strangely though, this one seemed to appear and disappear in puffs of smoke. She had known Vastaya touched by the clouds, with similar techniques, but this man's magic was strange. Even the shadows inside him were touched by something else, an echo of the magic of the twilight. He was powerful, more powerful than any mage, any mortal she had encountered. Weakened as she and Rakan were, Xayah knew defeating this armored warrior was unlikely. But since he already saw her, she had to face him. She threw feather blades, but he simply cut them apart. With each movement, she was getting weaker, and he closer. She stared as the warrior parried the next of her attacks, and sent one of the feather blades up into the quinlan. The red stone cracked instantly. That's when Xayah realized why this quinlan was locked inside the temple. It was powerful, but it was also very fragile. She still knew she couldn't defeat her opponent, but her only option was to distract him long enough to get a chance to destroy the quinlan. And so she threw as many of her daggers as she could create with her magic, forcing her opponent to duck and dodge, while knowing that every blade that flew past him had a chance to crack the quinlan. But soon, her efforts were futile, as she quickly became exhausted, and so she prepared herself for what she knew would come next. She would die, and so would this warrior, but the Vlotah would survive. Then she also remembered Rakan, and how she would never live through another moment with him. This inner distraction gave the warrior a chance to hit her and throw her to the ground. But when next the warrior leapt at her with a killing blow, instead of parrying it, Xayah threw all her blades up, and she shattered the quinlan. And as its pieces started falling down onto her and the warrior, Xayah knew this would be certain death. But then, suddenly, Rakan appeared, and with his golden energy shield, he protected Xayah not only from the killing blow of the warrior, but also from the falling shards. However, after the shards of the quinlan, the temple itself started collapsing, and even though Rakan tried to hold his magic up to endure, as the roof fell on them. There was nothing but darkness. The next time Xayah opened her eyes, she saw Rakan helping her to her feet in the ruins of the temple. The strange warrior was gone, and his followers were now fleeing from the released wild magic. The forest around them was blooming, but as the earth started shaking, Rakan told Xayah that he will try to get to the city in time and save that Abbess person. But Xayah told him that he probably won't have to, because she left her a message saying that this would happen before they snuck away. After all, Rakan trusted this woman, and Xayah trusted him. And that was the newest addition to the story of Rakan and Xayah. I am super glad that now Riot is going back to their older cinematics and they are trying to make them all canon. So yes, this was most likely a story that explained the old cinematic with Rakan and Xayah. So I wonder if the Climb cinematic will also get more pieces canon. Maybe Echo and Blitzcrank will be a thing. Speaking of which, those cinematics also had parts with Bilgewater in them. And guess what? Riot just released a massive Bilgewaterian story that hints at that. So you know what we are going to have a look at next.